Last month, I interviewed Paul McKenzie, a man who has spent roughly 20 years working with young people in Britain to teach them about the perils of drug abuse, gang life, and carrying weapons. After being expelled from school at the age of 14, he was stabbed in the hand with a machete at the age of 15, and just months later was sent to a youth offenders institute for himself carrying a knife, where he spent 6 months before eventually turning his life around. Last year, he posted videos online of himself interviewing teenagers who carry knives.
That if someone trying to pull up me, I'll take out my 15-inch and stab him.
You pull out your...
15-inch?
You carry a 15-inch knife?
Yeah.
Why do you carry a 15-inch knife?
Because it's big and you'll get them scared.
But you know the kind of damage that a 15-inch knife can do to somebody?
Yeah.
And you don't feel...
I don't care.
Okay, so just very quickly, because this is going to go out to young people. So if you have any issues on the street, how do you sort it out?
Dip him.
Huh?
Dip him in his chest.
You dip him in his chest?
Yeah.
Which means, like, stab him in his chest?
Yeah.
Have you ever done that before?
Mm-hmm.
But you know what to do if you have to do it?
Yeah.
Is this the same with your friends? You'll kind of all know what to do if it happens?
Mm-hmm.
Mr. McKenzie also last year participated in a BBC report on knife crime, in which he attempted to discover a knife in a park in London's Enfield area, and took just minutes to do so successfully.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Looks like it goes up there a bit. I'm really happy about finding this because that's probably going to save a life. Because you don't know how long that's been there, you don't know when somebody's going to come back and try and find it there to resolve a conflict. And that could be the difference between somebody living and dying, is right there. Because now I know that that is not going to go into somebody's chest. Yeah. Wow.
Here is my interview with Paul McKenzie. Paul, you have spoken openly in the past about how you went down the wrong path as a teenager and ended up in a youth offenders institute for carrying a knife. What were the circumstances that led to that?
A bit of peer pressure, a lot of going against the establishment. Growing up for me, it was always about going against everything, which led me into I'm not going to call it a gang, the group that I got involved with, which meant that carrying a knife was just natural. And so for me, carrying a knife ties in with going into the whole not going to school, doing crime, because that's what fueled it for me. It wasn't just carrying a knife, it was more a lifestyle of a knife being part of the movement, if I can call it that. I'm not gonna, because I'm trying to stay away from the current narrative, because even though it's still the same now, it was a little bit different. There was a bit more respect in what you did then. You didn't pull a knife on anybody. You pulled a knife because you had an ongoing beef, or you pulled a knife because somebody from a different area realized you were making more money and they wanted to come down and so it wasn't this randomness that's going on now. So for me, carrying a knife was always part of almost like the uniform at the time, because I threw away the school uniform. I didn't do all of that stuff. But I definitely did the street uniform stuff. So carrying a knife, carrying a whatever weapon you can get. I mean, I remember a boy I used to go around, he used to have a glove that he used Evo stick to stick pieces of glass on it. And that's how that's what he used to punch people. So it was really about what you chose to use as part of your day-to-day protection, which is not dissimilar to what they do now. But for me, it's a little bit more random now. There was even a little bit, the glove with the glass on it was just in case we couldn't get over this beef thing and this person had a knife, then I'd use the glove. But the glove was the protection, or the knife was the protection. So for me, carrying a knife and ultimately being charged for carrying a knife, I was arrested 3 times for knives. But on the last time I was arrested, I was carrying a ridiculously big knife. And I guess for me, it was really an eye-opener, because I always looked at, because back then it was like caution, slap on the wrist, slap on the wrist, slap on the wrist. And so to be sentenced for carrying a knife was what actually made me realize that, carrying a knife you could end up in prison or young youth offending institute for carrying a knife. So that's kind of where it all rounded itself off for me.
How did you, being expelled from school at the age of 14, fit into your decision making at that point in your life?
To be expelled from school at that time, a lot of things have changed now. Back then, teachers used to tell you, you're not going to be shit. They used to openly tell you that. There was nobody, I mean, once you became the person, for me, because I'm a very vocal person, so I used to speak out about everything. So if I didn't agree with a maths question, I used to ask why. Why do I need to know this? And so for me, school became very challenging. And so expulsion or being excluded from school, it was a great time. It meant that I wasn't in it. But the irony of it is that the institution of school was everything, because that's where all my friends were still there. That's where all, the girls were there. And basically what that meant for me is, and I explain this in some of the videos I do, is like the day after being permanently excluded, to end up back outside the school is the irony of it all. So I guess for me, being at this age now, and if I'd go back to change that, I would have definitely enjoyed school in the same way, but I would have curbed those limits. For example, stealing from school, I would have curbed all those limits, but I would have still enjoyed almost the anarchy of being in a school. So for me, to be expelled at 14 kind of meant everything. It did propel a lot, because now that, when I finally accepted that, yeah, I'm not going back to this school, it meant that after accepting that and after understanding how ridiculous it looks sitting on the school gate, having been expelled, it kind of meant I just migrated into different groups of people and just got involved in crime and all that sort of stuff that came after it.
Why did you end up sitting outside the school after you were expelled?
Because I missed it. The irony of it is that I actually missed it. I pushed the boundaries so much, and back then there was the cane, so I was getting the cane every other day. I guess there was an order to it. And so to be excluded from an order, it meant you had to find another order. And so for me, the easiest thing to do was to go back to school. So the irony of sitting on the school gate the day after being excluded it actually makes me laugh right now, because it shows the importance of being included. And I actually felt that if I had been given another chance and made different decisions, I may have finished school. Having that experience of sitting on the wall, knowing that my friends were in class and they hadn't been as stupid as me, it was a real eye-opener. But having been permanently excluded, it just means that now you're open to the streets. You do anything you want. And I didn't tell my parents for about 2 weeks, because something inside me said, this can't be permanent. And I used to walk back and see the same teacher and say, get off of the gate, go away. We're not interested in you anymore. So when I finally told my parents, it was a real eye-opener. It was real, because I actually felt like a failure. It's weird. So for me, the natural progress was to find those other children that had been expelled from schools in different areas and form a group, which we did. And then we just went out and did what we had to do to survive. I grew up in an environment where, not so dissimilar to now, what young people are going through now, it was all about making money on a smaller scale. It didn't involve selling drugs. It was more robbery or going out and stealing something. Do you know what I mean? Or even mugging. A lot of people were being mugged at those times. So for me, the whole thing about being in an invisible space, I call it now, because I'm not in school. I've got freedom. My mum and dad have gone to work. My sisters have gone to school. I'm the layabout. I have to go and prove myself. And so I had to go and prove myself in whatever context I could. And for me, being part of an organization or a group of boys who were going through the same things as me, we had the same interests in mind, it was pretty normal. Pretty normal. Yeah.
Were you seeking to prove yourself to them or to yourself?
Both. But if I had to choose which one it was more to them, because that's the nature and build up of groups of friends, I'm trying not to call them gangs, that it's always about proving who you are. I mean, there were members of the group who had different rankings to me. You know, they were more popular than me. And so I guess in a way, proving yourself does become the norm as well. You know, how much money can you make? How much did you make today? What have you done today that's bad? Or, you know, and all the time you really just want to go back to school. I just really wanted my friends, my real friends.
Sticking with you for just a second, at the age of 15, you were stabbed in the hand with a machete. How did that incident come about?
Through beef. It was still called beef then. You know, a lot of young people go, beef is an old word. You know, it was a beef, it was with somebody from another school. It was all over something that, it was about something that basically, it was about money. And it was about who got the most money. And so I felt that because of my involvement, I deserved more money. And it just ended up with that person pulling out a really big knife and sticking it through my hand, which frightened the shit out of me, because everything becomes real. Because you can carry a knife, anybody can carry, it's like these young people, they carry knives now, and up until the point they use that knife and they see blood, they actually don't realize why they carry it, or how harmful just a simple move can be. And like I said, I've never used a knife on anybody. I carried many knives, never had the opportunity to use it, never actually wanted to use it, but just wanted to have that vibrato, you know, that bravery look about me. I carry a big knife and I'm a bad man and stuff. So when it was used on me, I was like, you know, this is fucking mad. So I'm running off down the street with a knife stuck in my arm. And so for me, a lot of things became real. And what that meant for me was almost immediately after that, my whole chain of thinking changed. So now it wasn't about this group, because it was a member of this group who did this to me. So it wasn't about these people, it was actually about my associations. Who am I? I've got to be careful with who I hang around with. I've got to be careful with how I actually look at life now. So like I said, after this mad period, I actually started to really reinvest in education. So that was the irony of it, is, you know, when I started to sort my life out for about 17, 18 years old, I really took education seriously. And the whole notion of getting a career and getting into work became really serious for me. And so for me, that incident there meant it was a real eye-opener. It was like, you know, this is what knives do. And so when I meet young people who've got stab marks over their body, I understand where they're coming from. I understand the ones that want to change, and it's strangely enough understands the ones that they want retaliation, because it's not nice. You know, even though I survived this, it's literally a half an inch from my main vein. So even though I survived this, it's kind of an eye opener to, I never want that to happen again. And so that's kind of what made me a bit passionate with this current wave of knife and gun crime, to actually go and speak to young people and find out where they are. Not to preach to them, but to actually tell them that, look, I've been through this. I know what you're going through. And I think a lot of youth workers don't actually know what young people are actually going through. So to know what they're actually going through, the whole schooling system, how it can end up, how you can end up being stabbed by somebody who you actually thought was a friend, is where the education needs to go with young people.
Did spending 6 months in a youth offenders institute also help you to turn your life around?
Man, I'll tell you what, like I said, systems have changed. Back then it was called the short, sharp shock. And whoever went through the short, sharp shock came out making different decisions. And this is why I keep going on about the short, sharp shock, because it's such a contrast to what it is now, what prisons are now. So for me, the impact of going through that, plus life decisions, was all I needed. I didn't need anything more. I didn't need anybody to come and tell me that you can still make money on the streets, because I've been there. I know that you can make money on the streets, but there's always a consequence. And so for me, it was looking at what are the consequences? What's really going to happen? Because committing an offence and thinking you got away with it, and then seeing it as evidence in a court case can scare the shit out of you. because a lot of young people do things now, but they don't realize that they're creating almost a footprint. And so when everything backs itself up, which is, I went to court for 17 offences, and it was actually my choice to have all of those offences heard on the same day. Because I actually got to the point where I said, you know, this is madness. And I remember being arrested, like, you know, and I feel really bad because I put my mum through a lot of shit. I remember being arrested 4 times in 2 weeks, and her having to leave work, and work was hard to find, and her having to come and sit outside in the police station for hours on end just to get me out. And so things like that kind of, it was like having an epiphany. And I think a lot of young people need to have that sooner rather than later, because it could save so many lives, because you got to think about what you put your parents through. And I thought about this, and I remember looking at my mum when I was sentenced, and I'll never forget this, looking at her through a peephole and seeing her crying. And my mum's not with us anymore, she's gone. So that's one of the memories, is looking through a peephole and seeing your mum crying. And that kind of scared the shit out of me as well. Yeah.
Now, there are videos with tens of thousands of views on YouTube of you interviewing teenagers who carry knives. Yeah. Broadly speaking, what have you learned from speaking with them?
That they're human, that they do walk around with a lot of fear, that they're not monsters, they're not demons, they're not devils like the media paints them. They're not all gang members, that some of them are just literally reaching out for help. Now, we live in a system where it's completely void of things for young people to do, and we are surprised that young people take this attitude to life. We're so surprised that it's happening. 10 years ago, I predicted this, and it's part of what I documented when I used to do the drug work, is that if we don't address these issues, if we don't start teaching young people about healthy body, healthy mind, then what we're going to see in 10 years' time is absolute madness on our streets. So the irony of working with these young people now is kind of testament to what we predicted. There's so many adults that I work with, youth workers from the old school, who actually saw this coming. And so now we're living in a society where we're just replaying what we spoke about. System doesn't work. The government's not helping too much, because the government itself is looking for solutions, which I think is wrong, because the government is, you know, if we go back to when I was doing drug education, and it was one of the key things to teach a young person at the time, it was the government that pulled that funding. So the government saw that it wasn't beneficial to teach young people about drugs, and now they're asking the question, how do we manage the behavior of young people committing violent acts and also taking drugs? So do you see what I'm going with it? So the government, to me, I will hold wholly responsible for where these young people believe their futures are. Young people look around now. For example, we're sat in a community centre now. You know, this community centre, young people won't even visit because they're living in fear. Nobody's going to come in this confined environment here for fear of being caught here. So you have a society of young people walking around with knives, fearful of their own lives, willing to use knives because they've got nothing to do. So if I was to look at what the problem is now, I would say that the government's got a big part to play. Also, I mean, you can't discount the fact that parents have a part to play. Young people's values have changed. Social media has a massive part to play. Also, the media as a whole has an incredibly massive part to play, because it perpetuates the same nonsense that we don't want to see. So every day we look on our phones, somebody gets into conflict, or somebody gets into an argument in a pub in Brighton, they pull out a knife, they use the knife, that gets attributed to young people in London. So now the rest of the world look at London or anything to do with knives, and they say, well, young people are going mad in London. No, they're not.
So what would you say to somebody who watches your interviews with these knife-carrying teenagers at home, and who comes away thinking, oh, well, they're just lost causes?
I mean, they're quite entitled to their opinion. Like I said, the media has made young people a lost cause, period. Most people who don't engage with young people, think that young people are a lost cause. I come from the point of view that if we think young people are a lost cause and we're getting older, these are the next generation, how on earth are we supporting the next generation by writing them off? So for me, these young people that I come across, I only get involved with them to raise awareness. So by raising awareness for young people about other young people carrying knives and trying to drill down into why they carry knives, you know, what is it that makes you carry a knife? What is it that sets you apart from a young boy who's now going to uni? What are the differences? So I create videos that are awareness videos. And so they work for young people and they also work for parents. You know, if we start talking about grooming videos, yeah, when I made a series of videos about grooming, people were still putting grooming under the carpet. People were saying grooming doesn't happen around here, but yet we still, you know, we've been having children going up country for the last 5 or 6 years. But nobody wants to address the fact that children are being groomed in your school, or your young teenagers may be missing because they may be up country selling drugs. That's the reality. Nobody wants to take that on board. Nobody wants to say, okay, if grooming is an issue, how do we deal with grooming? Which means that you've now got to be responsible for how you interact with your young person. Does that make sense? So what we're doing as adults is that we stick a PlayStation in front of them. They're on the PlayStation, we know where they are, yeah? We get on with our lives. And if you look at a lot of adults who are busy getting on with their lives on social media, they haven't got time to find out what their young people are up to. So a lot of the videos I do are about, you know, move away from this for a minute and find out where your young people, where your young person is right now. You know, find out whether or not the fact that they go out to school dressed in school uniform, come back in a tracksuit and expensive trainers that you didn't buy for them, start asking questions. Because that's the root of all of those issues that young people are, we're not paying enough attention.
Let's talk about knife crime more generally. Yeah. You have stated before that there are a lot of knife crimes that are not reported due to people not wanting to be involved with police. Could you expand on that?
Okay, without going into too much details, because this is an area that is not being addressed at the moment. And basically young people are afraid if they're injured and it's not life-threatening. There's been talk, and it's been proven, because I went down the whole route to find it, and there will be a video on it soon, about parents who are medically trained stitching children up. This is the next area that we are not ready to accept yet. So these are responsible adults, professional adults, who are stitching children up. So for me, it's a disgusting thing. For young people, it's a way of not being arrested. There's so many more stabbings than the media actually broadcast, because what happens is if it's a fatality, the news is on it. If it's a dispute that happens between two friends, the only two people that know about it, or the only group of people that know about it, are the people that were there. Yeah, the young person is not going to go to the hospital unless it's life-threatening. You know, we ran a workshop in a school. And boy comes in sweating, absolutely sweating. So about half an hour into the workshop, we find out that he was stabbed the night before. And so the initial conversation with the boy about, no, I'm going to be all right, and us saying, what the fuck? This boy was stabbed the night before, and he's not in the hospital, he's not gone to hospital, he sat in the workshop. So we had to call the ambulance to take him to the bloody hospital. So the whole point is that the mindset of it's not life-threatening, I can ride this one, is quite worrying.
You've also talked about a fear of snitching among young people. Could you explain that a bit further?
For young people now, there is a culture of talking out loud. And when I say snitching has gone from, you know, I know who did this, to I never ever want to talk to anyone with a camera, I never ever want to talk about anything I've seen. All of that is classified now as snitching. Anything you say outside of a gang or a group of friends or a posse, you see, is now classified as snitching. So you're not going to get young people that say, I was stabbed 3 times in the chest on the way home from school by so-and-so, who I know. That information's never going to pass the lips. And so this culture of snitching, again, is what perpetuates the whole retaliation, and it perpetuates the fear amongst young people, because young people know now, or believe now, that if they speak out, then there's an automatic retaliation. You know, if they Snapchat the fact that they've been stabbed by so-and-so, it's all over, yeah? So the culture of snitching now has become so prevalent within the community that young people, they're not going to speak about it, you know? And you'll know this if you ask a young person to go on camera and talk about what they want to be in the future. Even something as simple as that, young people say, yeah, but where is it going to be broadcast? I don't want to be seen to be speaking. Does it make sense? I don't want to be seen to be speaking to authority or anybody that's linked to the media. And this is a simple question about where do you think your life's going to be in 10 years' time? I'd rather I didn't speak. But yet they can make videos about stabbings and, yeah? So you see the contrast. You don't want to speak about the future, but I can share a video of a boy being murdered in a house party. And that's where the fear creeps in.
Paul, thank you.
Is that it?
That's it.
What I would do is, before anyone say anything, one clap, real quick. They haven't even done anything. I'll just slap them so they know their place very fast.